So my presentation today is about a joint effort with several people. So first and foremost, Mao Nishino. Okay, actually the pointer doesn't work. It's fine. Well, okay. So Mao Nishino is a PhD student at FSU and did a good part of his work in his visit last summer and the months that followed. His two advisors, Martin Bauer and Tom Needham at FSU as well. And this work is also kind of a continuation, or was motivated initially by a work we did a few years ago with Thomas Piron, which I'll mention briefly at some point in the talk. Okay, first thing I'll say before I start is that, okay, this is very much a work in progress, okay, so at this point, it's likely that there are quite a lot of things that we might be able to improve in the future. I will mention some of the open questions that are left in the last part of the talk. So the first thing is that, okay, it's going to be a talk mostly about optimal transport, not so much about shape or geometry. So I'm going to start maybe giving a brief background about optimal transport and focusing especially on the unbalanced version of optimal transport. So okay, as you probably all know, I mean, optimal transport is kind of a relatively old field now. It has many connections with different areas of mathematics. But it also has a lot of, I've seen a lot of application in the past 10 years. Application in, for example, in image processing, image analysis, like for histogram matching, for problems like segmentation, but also in machine learning. It's used a lot for training of, for example, of GANs, of generative adversarial neural networks. So as we also saw in the previous talk, in the talks of yesterday, there is different ways to formulate optimal transport that are equivalent under certain conditions. Here we are mostly going to be concerned with the dynamic version of optimal transport, but I'm going to start with the one that's usually more familiar for most people, which is called static or Monge-Kantorovich formulation of optimal transport, where basically you have two, let's say, probability measures for now, defined on a space omega. So here omega is generically going to be a compact convex subset of some Rn, let's say. So in this version of optimal transport, what you are looking for is an optimal coupling between the two measures, or optimal transport plan, pi, that is a measure on the product space omega times omega, which the first marginal is ρ0 and second marginal is ρ1, and that minimizes a cost that is, yeah, I can't really point anything, but okay, well, it's fine. I'll do it. So a cost that's basically the integral of a certain cost function c of xy integrated with respect to this d pi measure, where c of xy basically represents the cost of transporting 1 unit of mass from a point x to a point y. So you can take different costs that you could choose, but in this talk we are mainly going to be focusing on taking the Euclidean square distance for the cost, which leads to basically the well-known 2 Wasserstein distance between measures. So that's basically the kind of static formulation, the Monge-Kantorovich formulation, but it turns out that under certain conditions it can be shown to be equivalent to another version, the dynamic formulation, as was proposed by Benamou and Brenier in their 2000 paper, where here instead of optimizing over a transport plan, you optimize over a transport field, so a deformation field or a velocity field, V, and a path of measure, an interpolating path between the two measures, and where the cost that you optimize is basically the integral over 0,1 of the L2 norm with respect to the measure ρt at time t, and you minimize that basically over all path of measure ρ and velocity field V, under the constraint that V and ρ are connected with via the transport equation or the so-called continuity equation. And the boundary constraint that ρ at time 0 is 0, and ρ at time 1 is ρ1. Okay, so right now I'm staying a bit formal. I'm assuming density measure, but I'll write the things in a more general setup right after. So this is just a picture illustration of these two formulations. In one case, you're optimizing a transport plan, so you are looking at how much mass you transport from one point x to another point y. That's a static formulation. In the dynamic formulation, you directly optimize over an interpolating path between the measure, which is parameterized by the vector field, the deformation field that you apply to that. Okay, so that was basically standard optimal transport. Okay, this is not working anymore actually. Ah, il n'y a plus rien qui marche en fait. Ah oui. Non. Yeah, okay. No point on me. All right, the old-fashioned way. Okay, so this was like classical standard optimal transport. Now in the, okay, so one limitation of optimal transport is that you preserve the mass. So essentially you can only compare two probability measures or two measures that have the same mass. So precisely unbalanced optimal transport was introduced to basically alleviate that problem and basically be able to compare any measure, even if they have a different mass. So in the dynamic formulation, it's pretty easy, pretty natural to formulate this unbalanced optimal transport problem because essentially you can start from the continuity equation and add a source term. So this is this zeta function I'm writing here, which represents how much mass you add or remove at time t and at position x that you combine with the transport equations. So now the next question is what penalty do you put on this added source term? So there is different choice you can have. Here I'm going to follow basically the approach that was proposed independently in two papers by Shiza and al. And Liro et al., where they propose basically to put a penalty that's the Fisher-Rao metric on the source term. So meaning that, again, formally, assuming you have density measures, just to simplify, the cost that you minimize now is a combination of the transport cost we had before, a weighted combination with this parameter delta, with a penalty on the source term that's exactly given by this expression here. That's basically the Fisher-Rao energy of the function zeta at time t and position x. Okay, so this is just a formal vision basically of how unbalanced optimal transport is set. So because we are going to propose a variant of that, I need to go a little bit deeper on how you really formulate this problem more rigorously for any type of measure. So for that, I'm going to follow the presentation by the paper from Shiza, Perret, Schmitzer, and François-Xavier Valard. And I want to give a lot of credit to this paper, by the way, because we really relied heavily on that, on their work in our explorations. So here the things we are going to do, just compared to the previous formal presentation, is that first we are going to introduce the momentum variable. This is just an easier way to write the continuity equation. So we introduce this variable omega, that's rho times v, so momentum instead of velocity field. And we need to view rho, omega, and zeta now not just as functions, but as measures, general measures. So here rho, omega, and zeta are going to be measured on the product space 0, 1 times omega. With omega being a vector valued measure, it's a momentum, so it's a vector valued measures. And the first thing is that, okay, you can define what does it mean to satisfy the continuity equation in this measure setting. And there it's pretty natural. It's just we'll say that rho, omega, zeta satisfies the continuity equation in a distributional sense if they satisfy this equation for all test function phi that are in C1. So it's just a classical way to write a sort of weak formulation of this continuity equation with the two boundary constraints at time 1 and time 0. So just one little remark that will become relevant for later. Whenever you have a measure mu that satisfies this continuity equation, what you can show is that the measure rho is not in fact any measure on the interval 0, 1, but disintegrates in time with respect to the Lebesgue measure. So meaning that you can view rho as a path of measure, not just as a measure on the interval 0, 1 times omega. Okay, the next thing is that you have to define the cost associated to that. So there you start by defining the infinitesimal cost, which is just exactly the equivalent expression with respect to the momentum of the inside term I had in the integral before, and that you extend to all value r, rn, and r, so all the interval r times rn times r. And so importantly, this function is a convex and one homogeneous function. So then from that, you can define basically now the cost over the triplet of measure, rho, omega, and zeta. There is a little trick, is that you can introduce a measure lambda that dominates all the measure rho, omega, and zeta. You can always find a measure like that. So then this means that you can write the Radon-Nikodym derivative of rho, omega, and zeta with respect to lambda. So now you have functions with respect to this common measure lambda, and define the energy of the measure mu as the integral over 0, 1 times omega of this f delta function applied to that. And the trick is that here, because of the one homogeneity of the function, f delta, this does not depend on the choice of lambda that you pick up. Okay, so that's basically how you define the unbalanced optimal transport now between any set of measures. And so the formulation at the end becomes the following: is that if you are given two measures rho 0 and rho 1, that doesn't need to be priority measure anymore, two positive measures rho 0 and rho 1, you define basically the unbalanced optimal transport by minimizing this functional over all triplets of path of measure rho, momentum measure omega, and the source measure zeta. That satisfies the continuity constraint in the distributional sense. So here just a summary of a couple of results from the paper by Shiza and al. It will be relevant for later. Is that this quantity here is always finite, and it also happens to define a distance between measures that's called the Wasserstein-Fischer-Rao metric, or Ellinger-Kantorowicz in some other papers. Second thing is that this, for this metric, this space of measure is a length space, so there is always a geodesic that connects any two measures, rho 0 and rho 1. And it also has a static formulation that I'm not going to do too deep into that because it's not going to be so relevant for our talk. But there is also what was proved later on, but there is also a static formulation of this Wasserstein-Fischer-Rao metric, which is based on semi-couplings optimization. Okay, so that basically was just it for the background on optimal transport. So let me get to where we came in this thing. So, okay, as you can guess from the title, our idea was to try to introduce some constraints, so add some constraints in this formulation of unbalanced optimal transport. And constraints that are on the dynamic formulation, but just to put that into a bit more larger perspective, let me just mention a couple of things first about how, okay, if you want to put constraints on optimal transport, unbalanced optimal transport, there are different ways, so different types of constraints you can consider. So one are constraints on the domain omega directly, so this is still optimal transport, but may potentially a non-canonical domain. You can put in the static formulation of optimal transport, there has been a lot of work on putting constraints on the transport plan. So for example, in mathematical finance, people have looked a lot at problems like capacity constraints or martingale constraints on the transport plan. There is also constraints where you can say that you want to restrict to some specific parametric distribution of parametric measures. So we saw some example of that in yesterday's talk, if you consider the Burr-Wasserstein metric on the space of Gaussian distribution, for example. But there is also a last type of constraint where rather than pre-specifying a family, a parametric family of distribution, you can also consider implicit constraints on, so either on the space of measure you want to consider, or on the path, dynamic constraint on the path of measure that you want to optimize on. So as you can guess, this is this last type of constraints that we are going to be interested in this talk. And okay, at least to my knowledge, they are a little less studied than constraint on the transport plan, the static formulations. But there still has been some papers on that, so let me just mention a couple of ideas that you could try there. So maybe, so first approach, maybe a kind of very optimistic approach would be to say, okay, you could maybe try to reduce that to finding totally geodesic subspaces for the Wasserstein metric or the Wasserstein-Fischer metric. So that will be the ideal case, because in this case, if you have a totally geodesic space, then your constraint is automatically satisfied for any geodesic that connect two measures. Well, the difficulty is that there are very few known interesting examples of totally geodesic subspaces for the Wasserstein metric. And for the Wasserstein-Fischer metric, it's even more complicated. So if you take something as simple as, for example, restricting to probability measures, this is not a totally geodesic space for Wasserstein-Fischer. So if you take the unbalanced optimal transport between two probability measures, the path will typically leave the space of probability measures. So that's the reason why, I mean, some recent works have tried to enforce the constraint within the formulation of optimal transport. And most of these work are mostly focused on balanced optimal transport. And also, most of these work are typically more focused on the numerical aspects of things. So what was our goal in this work? Is to try to define a mathematical framework with quite specific constraints. We are not looking to be something very general yet. But to define a mathematical framework where we can at least say some things about, for example, the existence of solution, and okay, some other properties of the metrics that we can define on this. So that was essentially like our goal in this work, is to start from a mathematical framework and see at least what we can say if we put this kind of constraints. So now let me define the setup that we are going to be considering. So here what we are going to consider is, as I said, constraints that are enforced along the path of measures that you consider. So along the path ρt of measures that you look at. We are going to look at constraints that are pretty simple, that are constraints that, in lack of better term, we can call integral affine constraints on the measure ρt, where we are going to ask that the measure, at almost all time t, at least the measure ρt should satisfy a constraint of the form that the integral of some function h of tx d ρt equals to some function f of t. So here h and f are predefined functions, which we assume to be continuous. And we are going to ask basically for the measure ρt to satisfy this kind of integral affine constraints along the path. So the way to think about that is that basically in the general case, at each time we are enforcing the measure ρt to belong to a certain affine subspace, finite codimensional affine subspace of the space of measures. Or a particular case is that if you assume the function f, h and f to be both independent of time, that means that you are really restricting to an affine subspace of measure in a affine subspace of positive measures. So that's a very specific type of constraint, and okay, most likely there is ways to extend this to what we did to other more general constraints. We'll mention that at the end. But the reason why we consider that is because it kind of fits quite a bunch of problems that we had in mind when we started this work. So let me just give you a couple of examples of problems that connect to this type of constraints, just to make it more concrete. So the first problem, the one I just mentioned, is that if you want to restrict to probability measures, for example, which is not a totally geodesic space for Wasserstein-Fischer-Rao, well, there it's just amounts to taking a constraint where h is equal to 1, f equals to 1. That means that your constraint becomes that ρt of omega should be equal to 1 along the path. So that's enforcing that you stay in the space of probability measures. More generally, if you just still keep the function h to be equal to 1, but you consider a function f of t that depends on time, now you can basically solve problem where you are solving like an unbalanced optimal transport problem under the constraint that you know exactly what is the total mass at each time. So it's like of doing optimal transport, but with a constraint that you know exactly what is the total amount of mass that you have at each time t. So this kind of problem appears, for example, if you are looking at population, transport of population, but you measure the total amount of mass that you have at every single time. Another example that fits this framework is if you have obstacles or barriers that are time dependent. So then you can imagine a situation where you have your domain omega, and inside omega you have an open subset that depends on time, gamma of t, that varies continuously in time. So there, if you define h to be a continuous function strictly positive inside this gamma of t and 0 outside, like for example the distance to the boundary, for example, then basically the constraint becomes that rho t of gamma t should be equal to 0. So that means that you can allow no mass to pass through this subdomain, or or in the unbalanced case, to be created inside that domain. So basically gamma of t acts as a barrier as a time-dependent barrier in the formulation. And so beyond the constraints that are just on the mass, basically what fits also this framework is if you have constraints that are, for example, higher order moments of your distribution. So for example, I mean, you could put a constraint about variance, constraint about the expectation of some functions that you observe along the path of measures. So a simple example being that if you take just h of tx equal x and f of t equal to 0, that means that you are working with center distribution. So you are enforcing that the distribution should stay center along the path that you optimize. So the idea that we are going to embed basically this constraint into the formulation of unbalanced optimal transport. Okay, so I think I don't have so much time. So this was just a little digression. I had planned just to mention that that's the only relationship there is to geometry in this talk. But I'm going to go fast because, okay, it will take a bit of time to explain in details. But there is one example, and this was actually the motivating example initially to start this work, where these kind of constraints appear naturally when you consider the so-called area measure of hypersurfaces in Rn. So just to make the long story short, I mean, area measures are measures that are defined on a sphere, where basically that represents the distribution of how much mass you have in the different normal direction to a surface. So it's a measure on a sphere where basically for any Borel set B, this measures how much of the surfaces has a direction that's pointing with a direction that belongs to this set B, what is the volume of the corresponding subset of the surface that you have there. And so it turns out that if you look at area measures, because area measures of closed hypersurfaces, they do satisfy a constraint like of the form I mentioned before, because basically of the closeness of the surface imposes that you should have that the integral of x d sigma of Sx for any area measure for any hypersurface, closed hypersurface, should be equal to 0. And so there has been some work there. I'll go very quickly, but there has been some work of connecting basically this Wasserstein-Fischer-Rao metrics between area measure with some of the classical metrics that are looked in shape analysis, particularly the square root normal field distance. So this was a recent work by Martin, Eric Claassen, and Emmanuel Hartmann, where they essentially showed that if you take this SNRF metric, that's an elastic metric on the space of surfaces, modulo reparametrization, this boils down to calculating the Wasserstein-Fischer-Rao metric between the area measure of these surfaces. So this is a degenerate metric, but it's non-degenerate if you restrict to convex sets. So essentially you get a metric between convex sets using this kind of ideas, but it's not totally geodesic. So you get a metric, but if you calculate the geodesic between two convex sets with that metric, you leave the space of closed convex sets because you don't preserve the constraint. So one work that we had done back with Thomas Pierron back in the days was to try to look at if we could enforce this constraint within the formulation of, in that case, it was classical balanced optimal transport, and basically obtain some notion of distances and geodesic between convex sets by enforcing this constraint to preserve basically the closeness of the curve and surface of the curves that we are considering. So these were example in 1D in that case. Okay, so this was just a little digression to show that one example, a geometric example where this kind of constraints appear, and you have to restrict really you have to restrict your space of measures to be able to deal with these kind of things. All right, so now let me get back to the actual formulation and what we are able to show in practice with specifically for this type of integral affine constraints. So there, okay, I'm going back to the notation I had before. Thanks. We have two functions h and f, okay, both continuous functions that take value in Rd. So this is basically the number of constraints that we have. And we start by defining a subset of the candidate measure mu, the triplet of measure, rho, omega, sigma. by basically just adding the constraint that we want to have at each time t for the measure rho t. So this will be the set of all measures that satisfy the continuity equation, subject to the constraint I defined before. So note that this is well defined, thanks to the remark I made before, because if you have a measure that satisfies this continuity equation, then it disintegrates in time with respect to the Lebesgue measure. So it makes sense to consider this type of constraint for almost all time t in this formulation. And so then you can define the Wasserstein, the constrained version of the Wasserstein-Fischer-Rao energy by just taking the infimum of the same cost as we had before. So we don't change the cost, but we restrict to a subset of the candidate of the measure mu that we allow there between rho 0 and rho 1. So the first and main question we are trying to address there is to see, okay, under which condition can we guarantee that there exists minimizer for this problem? And so essentially this problem you can decompose it into two steps. So there is the first step where if you assume that the cost is finite, that the distance is finite, the energy is finite, then showing that there exists a minimizing path. That's the first step. And the second step is, okay, finding condition under which you can guarantee that this energy is finite. So I'll start with the first problem because essentially this one turns out to be a little easier. Not so much that it's easy by itself, but because basically you can really much adapt the proof for classical unconstrained unbalanced optimal transport in that case and obtain a pretty general result. So the result is like that, is that if you just take h and f, two continuous functions, and you have what you need to assume to be integrable, then if you have a finite energy path, so if our cost function is finite, then basically a minimal energy path exists. So if you are finite, then you are guaranteed that there exists a finite energy path. And the proof, I'll go quickly because I don't have so much time, but essentially it's very similar to the proof that you do in the unconstrained case. You just basically use the Fenchel-Rockefeller duality theorem, and the main trick is to introduce a primal problem for which you can apply the Fenchel duality, Fenchel-Rockefeller theorem, and which dual happens to be exactly the problem that you are trying to solve in the first place. So there you can do that with the constraint, you just need to modify a little bit the definition of these functions, and at the end, the theorem applies and shows you that there exists a minimizing measure, mu, that solves basically this problem. Now the second step is, as I said, is to, okay, we know that if the cost is finite, then there is a minimizing path, but okay, is the cost finite? And that's where there is a very big difference with the classical unconstrained unbalanced optimal transport, because in the unconstrained case, that equation is trivial. You can take two measures, you take the Fischer-Rao path between the two measures, so you take no transport, just a pure source equations, and that does the trick. In our case, it doesn't work because this doesn't preserve the constraint. So you cannot just have a simple proof like that, and it's very likely that depending on the constraint, you might not even have a finite energy path if you have, for example, unfeasible constraints. So there we try to get, to obtain results as general as possible in different cases. So we don't have a general result on that. I mean, there is most likely some restrictions you need to put on the function f and everything. So here is the first result that we got in the case of a single constraint case, so d equals to 1. In that case, you can get a fairly general result if you assume that the function h is positive, is differentiable, and that you have basically, you can allow the function f to become 0, so you can get the mass to 0. That's something in the unbalanced optimal transport framework. But you need to satisfy certain condition of how the function goes to 0 at the point where it becomes 0, essentially. So I'm summarizing there. But if you have basically this kind of condition, then you can guarantee that there exists a finite energy path in our constraint set of measure mu. So, and therefore a minimizing path from the previous theorem. So just quickly, the proof is just trying to build, it's a semi-constructive proof in a sense. I mean, we are trying to build a candidate finite energy path by combining what we know for classical optimal transport and then using some kind of rescaling and rescaling arguments, essentially. So that's the first result in the case of a single constraint. For multiple constraints, that things where things, at least to us, become really difficult, and there we don't have like a very great result on that, I would say. Essentially, we've only been able to prove things if you have a constant function f. So if you have f of t that is a constant, basically. And in that case, if you have one of the two conditions that I'm writing here, then you can guarantee existence of a finite path. So the first condition is that if you assume both of your measures to be absolutely continuous with respect to a common measure rho bar, so their density with respect to a fixed measure. And the second condition is if you have a linear constraint. So linear constraint works fine, but the framework, that's a nice thing. Because essentially, in this case, you can directly build a finite energy path that's pretty much a Fischer-Rao path to the measure 0, and then that you grow back up to the target measure. So for linear constraint, that works because that preserves the constraint, essentially. But for any other cases, it's quite difficult to figure out how to build basically finite energy paths. So for this case, that's so far the best result we have been able to obtain when it comes to proving the existence of solutions there. So another question we looked at is when you specify this model to the case of where both function h, so the function h and f are independent of time. In this case, it's like really you are just restricting your model to a subspace of measures, to the same affine subspace of measure at all time, which is basically this space here. And so there, as you can expect, if you restrict basically this Verschoorstein-Fischer metric to that, you should obtain a metric on this subspace, on this affine subspace of measures. So that's something you can prove, but it's quite simple, quite expected in a sense. So you do obtain basically a metric on this space, on this subspace of measures. And then we try to push a bit the analysis further by looking at, well, there I have to go quick because it's a little technical to explain, but a question that we are trying to ask is there any way to obtain some form of static formulation for this constraint metric? And so when I say static here, it's not in the sense of optimal transport plan, it's more in the sense of Monge formulation of the problem. And okay, well, to make things quick, there is a Monge formulation for the unconstrained unbalanced optimal transport, where you have to augment your action of a diffeomorphism group by the action of a rescaling functions. And then for a certain metric that you put on this cone, so on this space here, so the L2 metric with respect to this cone metric on the base space, then you can show that you have a Riemannian summation between this space of diffeomorphism and rescaling function that acts on density measures like this. And from that, you can write a Monge formulation where basically you can rewrite the optimal transport problem as a problem of minimizing over a diffeo and diffeomorphism and a rescaling function f. So just to make it quick, for the case of for a constraint problem, you can write something similar, but you have to restrict your space. You have to consider a submanifold of the space of automorphism, which have to preserve basically the constraint that you are imposing. And so there you can write it formally, but it's kind of difficult to do anything from that. So right now we are still trying to think about some cases where we might be able to write a Monge an effective Monge formulation for the problem. In this case, but that requires basically studying what is basically this restriction of the space of automorphism and what is the induced metric on this submanifold in the space of automorphism. Because this is not a subgroup, this is like just a submanifold in this space, so that's not like as a really nice structure to consider. Okay, well, I'll just mention very quickly some open questions that are left. So what we have, the obvious questions there is how much we can generalize the existence result to more general constraints and more general domain. So one question is, can we write that for manifold domain, for example? This is important for the case of area measure because this is on a sphere. So we have started working on that, but right now, okay, the fully general of a manifold case is quite hard. But I mean, there are some difficulty to be dealt with, so right now we are not there yet. But you could consider also more general inequality constraint of the affine type, like I mentioned before. Another way to extend that would be to look at constraints that are under control, the momentum and the source, rather than directly on the space of rho. That's potentially another approach we have. Well, that I will skip, but there is also, we have trying to work also on writing some explicit formulas in simple cases of what are the geodesic for this constraint case. So again, we have so far mostly conjectures. That's kind of difficult to really get a full proof of whether this path that we assume, we think are the optimal path are really optimal. And the last thing is the numerics. So, okay, so numerics we have actually just done very recently, just in last week, we made quite some progress on that in the implementation of this. So basically, we try to adapt some proximal splitting algorithm that are used in classical optimal transport to the case of this constraint problem. And okay, we started obtaining just results only the last few days, so I just show one of them. This was just an example in 1D, just a two Gaussian function in 1D. And basically computing the unbalanced optimal transport in three different scenarios. The unconstrained case, just the standard Wasserstein-Fischer-Rao. The case where we impose a probability constraint, we force a measure to stay a probability. And the case where we enforce the mass to increase and then decrease, so increase to the value 1.5 and then decrease to 2.1 with respect to this parabolic function. And so these are the paths that you obtain, the computed path you obtain with the code we wrote. And the bottom plots show you exactly what is the mass, the evolution of the mass, the computed evolution of the mass, of the total mass for these three different paths. So it's exactly what you expect. There you have you fix the constraint to the mass to be 1. There you increase the mass and then decrease the mass. And this is for the unconstrained case. You see that there you have a decrease of mass. That's what I was saying, is that matching probability distribution with Wasserstein-Fischer-Rao typically tends to decrease the mass and then re-increase it. That's what you see here. Well, we have other example, but Mao has a poster this afternoon. He might show some little more like a funny example. That was just a simple example we got just a few days ago. So okay, so I think I'm done. I'll just mention, so we have just like a preprint on some of the things I showed on arXiv. Mao is also doing a poster presentation this afternoon, so might have time to say a few more things. And we also have the Python implementation. We are still working on it, so it will be on GitHub at some point, but probably not before a couple of months until we are really like well, at least consider different type of constraint than just the one I showed here. Okay, so I'll stop here. I think yeah.
So, questions?
Excellent. Great work. In your case where you put the constraint of mass conservation,
yeah.
How different is your optimal path compared to the Wasserstein?
To the standard Wasserstein. Yeah, it's different. I didn't plot it, but it's different because you do have source. You have creation of mass there. I didn't plot. I should have plotted also the thing that shows the vector field and the mass. In that case, you still do create and delete mass. It's not the same as just pure transport. So it's not the same as it's a different geodesic than the one you will obtain with Wasserstein.
Yes.
Unless you take a parameter, very high parameter on your delta. If you put a very strong penalty on the Fisher-Rao, at some point you will get pure transport,
right?
And then you should find exactly the Wasserstein geodesic.
But doesn't that tell you that the way you're creating mass in the Wasserstein Fisher-Rao is not natural in some way? Wouldn't you like to have, when you put a constraint like this, to have the unbalanced reduced to the standard Wasserstein as a, you know?
Yeah, I mean that's not going to happen, no, because unless you take a very high, you put a super strong penalty on the Fisher-Rao. But no, I mean in that case you cannot get something like that. No, it's a different type of geodesic that you get. But just to say, mention that, I mean one of the reasons why also because you could define what I defined for standard optimal transport. I mean, you can take the optimal transport and add the constraint along the path. We actually did that in our first work with Thomas for one particular constraint. But the difficulty with that is that one of the reasons we wanted to take Wasserstein Fisher-Rao is that you have a lot more freedom to do things. It's much easier to at least obtain result of existence of solution. With pure Wasserstein, it's very hard because but even the example you say, if you put even like a simple example where you take an interval and you put a barrier constraint in the middle, well, there is no way you can match anything. Whereas with Fisher-Rao, you can delete and create mass on the other side. So you have a lot more freedom you have a lot more like mass, like distribution that you can access with this model than just standard optimal transport.
So I was really intrigued by this result. I guess maybe it's from some previous stuff where you mentioned that you can pull back this Wasserstein Fisher-Rao through this bijection to have a kind of Riemannian structure on the space of convex sets.
Okay, I passed very fast on that.
Yeah, so I guess the reason it was interesting is like something that's known in this theory of random sets stuff is that like it's really hard to there isn't really a nice canonical notion of Gaussian measures on convex sets. But somehow it seems like here you could do some Riemannian Gaussian thing. So I'm curious if you know what.
This is something we just for us a pretty generic question of seeing if we can compare convex set via some kind of comparison of the area measure. I didn't push that thing too far yet, but I mean that's something that could be definitely interesting to check. I mean the reason why we can pull back this is I went pretty quick on that, but this is because of this important theorem in convex geometry. That you have a bijection between the set of convex sets modulo translation with the set of measures that satisfies the constraint I mentioned before. So that's the Fenchel-Jessen theorem. That's really one of the foundational results in convex geometry. So that's what you can use really to say that comparing the area measures of two sets allows you, and if you can get a geodesic between the area measures, you can a priori reconstruct a geodesic between the convex sets for the corresponding metric. But yeah, I mean beyond that, I haven't really yet pushed too much things farther than this. Yeah, but especially because computationally, I mean, in the 1D case, it's quite easy. In the 2D case, it becomes a little bit trickier because even reconstructing a set from its area measure, it's not an easy problem by itself. In 1D, it's trivial. In 2D, when I give you an area measure on the sphere, reconstructing the convex set that is associated to that, well, there is a unique one, you know it for theory. But reconstructing it, there is some algorithm that have been developed for that, but it's not like something you can solve explicitly. You have to solve typically some kind of optimization problem to do that.
Thanks for the nice talk. And if I understand correctly, in general, unbalanced optimal transport is cheaper than the classical optimal transport. But I think it doesn't naively apply to your case because you have additional constraint. And and I have a vague guess of when your stuff is cheaper than the classical optimal transport or the other way around. But have you ever kind of established a criterion about this?
So in our case, yeah, because we had constraints, obviously the cost is going to be higher because we have a more constrained space in which to move. What you mean is what is the difference, like some bounds or no? I mean that we have not really looked into it, just only because already proving that there exists a solution is not so trivial. But I don't know if you are asking about like just the difference between the two costs. I mean, I guess at some point we'll do numerical experiments when we have a code to check that. But I mean, theoretically, I don't know. I mean, that depends highly on the type of constraint you choose. I mean, there are cases where the constraints have no effect and you can probably have the same cost. But there are some constraints when you can have a huge effect. I mean, okay, that was an example I plan to show. I mean, if it can help just to show, maybe it's one way to illustrate what you just said, but this was an example that Mao simulated that I can try to show just very quick. Just to illustrate your point. This is an example where we do this unbalanced optimal transport with a barrier. So that's a barrier constraint. So we are putting some barriers. And we are moving a mass from the top left corner to the back left. So this is a case where we have static barriers. So the constraint is just it's fixed barrier. So there is something that, okay, it's a kind of not really a dynamic constraint. It's the same barrier for each time. But so this is a solution you get where you get the mass that moves around. Basically, there is also a bit of Fisher-Rao thing happening, but it's not as easy to see there. But if you look at now a case where you take a moving barrier, where basically, essentially, the idea here is that you look at a case where navigate there, but this is a case where basically the barrier is growing on the bottom part. So at some point, it completely blocks basically the path. And there you can see that basically the geodesic now becomes almost a pure Fisher-Rao geodesic. You just teleport the mass. Because there it's not anymore like efficient to go around. But at some point you cannot get fast enough in a small cost to go around this barrier that's moving too fast essentially. So there the geodesic is completely different and the cost will be very likely quite different between these two problems. It's just to show that there the geodesic is very different if you take these two different constraints. So okay, but that's the best I can say right now. I mean I don't know I don't have any mathematical result on that. This was just a numerical illustration.
Yes, there was just one technical detail that I wanted to understand. This lambda, so you said that you can find a dominating measure for all the interpolating measures. What is the lambda?
By lambda, you can take, I guess you can take the sum of the total variation of the three measures.
So
yes.
When you just have optimal transports, even a balanced optimal transports, you cannot always find a measure that will dominate the whole path, or can you?
It's not the whole, but here we are talking about measure on the product interval, and it's not a path of measure. That's why also we are working in this space of measure of 0,1 times omega. So in that case, I mean, I think you can just take you have three measures. You can take the sum of the total variation of the three measures. I think that should do the trick.
Okay,
but
yeah.
We can check it, but I think
yes.
But I'm pretty sure that works.
And yeah, the second question. Okay, so you say that indeed everything is dynamic. The problem that you solve is dynamic, and it's hard to find static formulations. But okay, you showed an example where you do have a static formulation, but in that case, are there some entropic regularization that you can do, or something in the vein of Sinkhorn algorithm?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really looked. I just don't. I have the feeling that it's not really going to give us a static formulation because the constraint is this kind of global constraint. I mean, I might be wrong there. I mean, I think I would very much like if there was a static formulation because typically the algorithms are better. Like solving like dynamic optimal transport is quite a bit more expensive than applying things like Sinkhorn algorithm. No, I haven't really tried. I don't know if this will really yeah, I mean, I don't know actually, but yeah, I'm happy to have a look. But with the approach we tried with this auto picture, I mean, the thing is that you can write, I mean, a Monge formulation. I mean, you can write it, but it's just that you can't really do much with it. I mean, because you have this submanifold of the space of automorphism. It's not even a subgroup. There is one case where we think that it's possible, because there it's quite simple, is if you take the probability constraint. Because there actually the submanifold I mentioned happens to be just the product of the diffeomorphism group with the sphere of positive densities, or of smooth positive densities. Because there it's easy to verify, since diffeomorphism doesn't change the mass, and if you don't want to change the mass, you have to take f square equals to 1, basically, meter of f square equals 1. So there you get something that's just the product of diffeos by the sphere. And so there, probably you can write something that will work there. But in the other kind of constraints, you get a submanifold. That you can write the constraint at each tangent space. But OK, then you have to write what is the induced metric. And I don't know if it's really we get anything from that. But we haven't tried too much, to be honest. But at some point, we might want to look a bit closer there. But for the entropic regularization, I don't know. Yeah, we haven't really looked yet. Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, yes, I can stop this just.
By proving your existence theorem, did you get some insight on negative results?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're trying to find some actual counterexample, because you can find like easy counterexample if the constraints are unsatisfiable. Well, that's the trivial case. You also have like, I mean, for example, the condition on f, the variation of f, this we think is a necessary condition. The fact that, for example, f has to be absolutely continuous, because essentially, if you have a measure that's basically obtained by throwing this, by taking this these transport equations, and you look at the total mass constraint, for example, just a simple case, then the mass has to evolve according to an absolutely continuous function. So if you don't have f to be an absolutely continuous function, there I think it's easy to design counterexample. I mean, it's clear that will not work. But then, I mean, interesting counterexample where, okay, it's not like that. I mean, I'm trying to think it's not easy because of, like, the thing is that Fisher-Rao, you can do a lot of things with Fisher-Rao. So with classical optimal transport, it's very easy to think about cases that will not work. For when you add the possibility of adding a source term, it's not so easy to find like interesting like counterexample where you don't have existence beyond the trivial case where your constraints are just not satisfiable. But I think something we want to look at just to have at least some insight about what can go wrong there. But yeah.
Okay, let's thank our speaker again.